Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. No, I hate it. You suck. So, you watched my first video and you made your Concord cherry wine. Now the question is, what do you do next? So from a big picture perspective, there are 3 stages in the winemaking process. Number 1, primary fermentation. This is the stage where your wine happens, okay? This is everything from when you put together your sugar, your fruit juice, and your yeast, all the way until you get all the alcohol, okay? This stage typically lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Once the yeast are done, then you have stage 2, secondary fermentation. This is when you rack or siphon or transfer your liquid from your first fermenter into a second vessel to get it off of the dead yeast and plant proteins that have settled out over the course of primary fermentation, and to help the wine clarify over time. You can also refer to this stage as conditioning, as bulk aging. In secondary fermentation, you can add fruit, you can add spices, you can also do that in primary, and they create a slightly different result. But once you have the wine tasting and looking exactly the way you want it, then comes stage 3, bottling. At this stage, you add various chemical stabilizers, maybe you back sweeten with some sugar, and you siphon your wine into bottles and you put them away. In video 1, I showed you stage 1, so in this video, I will show you stage 2 and 3. We started the Welch's Concord Cherry Juice Wine on September 7th, and today is April 25th of 2021. It's actually been slowly fermenting over the last 8 months, so I want to see what the reading is. So the first thing we want to do is take a gravity reading on it and then take a taste. Okay, so I can't get this open. So we're going to take the taste and the gravity reading by going through the little opening at the top, and then by the time I need to rack this out, we'll find out then what I'm going to do. So I've got my hydrometer, my little graduated cylinder to hold the liquid and the hydrometer to get an accurate reading. And then we use the turkey baster to transfer some of the liquid from here into the cylinder. And of course, as always, with all your tools and all your stuff that comes into contact with the wine, make sure that it's sanitized. I have a bucket over here off screen with Star San sanitizer mixed in water. Everything's just sitting in there getting sanitized. We have a reading here of, hold on, 1.022. Okay, 1.022 is a dessert wine level worth of sugar, right? I'm okay with that. Before I taste it, I want to explain what that gravity reading on the hydrometer indicates. First off, it tells us how much sugar is left in there. 1.022, it's the amount of sugar that you'll find in a commercially produced dessert wine, okay? The second thing that it tells us, how much alcohol our yeast made, what the ABV of this wine is. So, just roll with me here. The initial gravity was 1.120. All right, the final gravity was 1.022. We're gonna round, we'll say it's 1.020. To calculate alcohol, you take your initial gravity minus your final gravity, and then you take that amount and you multiply it by 131.25. So in this case, 1.120 minus 1.020 is 0.1 times 131.25 is 13.25. So our alcohol content on this wine is 13.25%. Now, taste it. It smells really pleasant. It smells like the Concord cherry juice that we made it from. The aroma through fermentation didn't really change, as far as I can tell. It does have a little bit of an ethanol alcohol note to it now. You can definitely smell that this is wine, but it's not unpleasant. Honestly, this isn't bad. I think it has a lot of flavor. It packs a punch right up front, but then it fades away really quickly. It's a light-bodied wine. It's very sweet, but there are no harsh elements to it at all. And that makes sense. This has been aging for like 8 or 9 months. That's a long time. Wines that you make at home tend to reach their peak around a year and a half, and they only get better as they keep aging, right? This is pretty good. It's a little more light-bodied than I'd like, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. We're not going to do anything more to it. We're not going to change it. However, more likely than not, you're not ready to bottle it because there's one step you need to take before you bottle, and that's to rack into your secondary vessel or container, right? This is the thing I fermented it in. And generally speaking, to get a crystal clear wine, you have to rack it at least once into another vessel and let it sit for several months to let gravity pull out all those particulates, all that dead yeast. For instance here, it's pretty clear, but it's not as clear as it could be. So If I really wanted to be thorough, I would rack it and then let it sit for maybe 2 more months and then bottle. But it's been long enough. It's been 8-9 months. I'm not waiting any longer. These are going into bottles. So I'll explain what you want to do everything correctly, but I'm going to be bottling today. All right, does that make sense? Do as I say, not as I do. Oh, that worked. Okay. We succeeded. So let's say it's been 2 months since you began the fermentation of your grape juice wine. What do you want to do next once it's done? Well, you want to rack it. That's just a fancy word to describe siphoning or transferring liquid from container A, your original fermenter, into container B, where the wine will condition, will age, will clarify over time. Now, what we're going to be using today to transfer the liquid from here to here is an auto siphon. Okay, it looks like this. It's got one part that's like a pump with a plunger and then tubing to transfer the liquid. Siphoning works by using the difference in elevation. If you have your original fermenter higher than where you want the fermenter to go, then the siphon can utilize gravity to pull the liquid all the way down without having to continually pump it, okay? And the reason we're siphoning instead of just pouring it from here into here is that we want to minimize oxygen exposure, okay? You'll remember from the first video, oxygen is really good for your yeast when they're in the very first stages of fermentation, okay? But once alcohol has been created, once it's done, all oxygen is going to do is contribute off flavors to your wine, and it's going to strip away the flavors you've worked hard to create. There's a link in the description if you want to buy one. All you do is pump your siphon several times to get it started, and then it'll start going all on its own. That's your main aim here, is to get as much of the wine as you can and as little of the yeast at the bottom. It's a balancing act. You can see all that dead yeast in there. That's why you want to be really careful when moving around your primary fermenter, because if you're too vigorous with it and you shake it around, all of the stuff that's been pulled out of suspension, all that gross stuff, it's going to get re-immersed in the liquid and take even more time to clarify. So be careful. So if that was your first time racking out of the primary fermenting vessel, you want to let it sit in secondary fermentation until it becomes clear, okay? So if this is your first rack, let it sit. Let it sit for a while and then come on back. Okay, hey, how you doing? So now that you've let it sit in secondary fermentation for, let's say, 2 months, it's clear, it's ready to bottle. What do you want to do now? Well, you want to basically do what we did when we racked. You get it on an elevated surface, but instead of racking into another fermenter, you rack into bottles, all right? That's what we're going to do. However, the last thing you want to do before you bottle this stuff up is you want to add chemical stabilizers. Okay, we're going to be using 2, potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate. Potassium metabisulfite is going to prolong the shelf life of your wine, allowing it to age and to stay good for many, many years. The second one we add is potassium sorbate. That chemical coats whatever remaining yeast cells are in here and keeps them from reproducing. That means that if you have residual sugar in here, and we do, 1.022 is a gravity reading of some residual sugar, it'll prevent the yeast from re-fermenting. If you have a re-fermentation in the bottle, all that carbon dioxide gas that's produced increases the pressure in those bottles until they potentially explode. You don't want to do that, okay? You don't want to deal with that, that's dangerous. So just add the stabilizing chemicals and you'll have a wine that's safe to sit on a wine rack for years and years, okay? All right, here we go. So number 1, potassium metabisulfite. The dose, the right amount to use at bottling time is a 1/16 of a teaspoon. And then you want to do half a teaspoon of potassium sorbate. Bottling is the same process as racking. You have the container of wine elevated above your bottles and you rack straight into each bottle. So it's the exact same thing as racking from primary into secondary, except we're going to be using one attachment to the basic apparatus. We're going to be using a bottle filler. What this does is allows the wine to flow when this stem valve is pushed in and then the wine flow stops when you pull out. So you're able to go from bottle to bottle without spilling wine in between. All right? It's a pretty nifty attachment. I'd recommend getting one. There is a link for this in the description too. So what you do is you just push it in as far as it'll go. Get it ready by putting it into the first bottle. Make sure it's pushed all the way down. And then you start. If you only have one of you, if there aren't two of you doing this, it can be a little precarious when you're starting out. So just be careful that it doesn't tip over and spill everywhere. I've had that happen. And then you'll watch as it elegantly fills up the bottle. It's quite nice. Now here, you let the wine go all the way to the top and then pull out. And just like that, we've bottled our Cherry Concord wine. You'll notice they are corked now. I have a ground corker right over there. You can also use a hand corker. It's just a little more difficult to finagle the corks into the bottles that way, but you can do that. Or you can skip the process of corking entirely by getting bottles that have screw caps on them. I'll have a link in the description to those kind of bottles on Amazon that come with caps. So now that we're at the end of this 8-month-long process, what would I do differently next time? Well, number one, I would not use bread yeast, okay? I would use a wine yeast, a yeast that has been made in a laboratory and cultivated and isolated to make wine. Bread yeast is made to make bread. So generally speaking, if you use a wine yeast, you're going to get a better tasting product in the end. So I might use Lavin 71B, I might use Premier Classic, I might use Lavin D47, who knows? But I would use a wine yeast, not a bread yeast, all right? Number two, I would have added cinnamon sticks to this. Cinnamon and cherry are very complementary of one another. Cinnamon tends to bring out cherry flavors. Number three, I wouldn't ferment this with a starting gravity of 1.120. 1.120 is pretty high. That's asking a lot of your yeast, even wine yeast. I like to have my fermentation start at 1.090, okay? Because that pretty much guarantees that they will ferment out completely dry. I won't have to worry about having too much residual sugar. I can back sweeten and control the whole process of how much sugar there is in the end. So I wouldn't start out at 1.120. But you live and you learn. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe to this channel. What are you doing with your life? And watch the rest of my videos. We're getting better. We're continuing to fine-tune the process. It's a good time. But in the meantime, be safe and take care.